All right, I think I've got everything set up here. So this is Strange, Cool Shakespeare. I want to give you some ways of thinking about some of the plays, especially ones that you may have to read at some point, potentially in the near future for some of your classes. So what do we mean when we talk about Shakespeare? What does that talk about? Shakespeare was a poet and playwright in London, England, over 400 years ago. He was an actor and an owner in the most popular acting company in the period, the Lord Chamberlain's Men. And later they became the King's Men after Queen Elizabeth I died in 1603 and King James I became king. He wrote, sorry, I'm trying to get my Zoom stuff out of the way so I can see my slide here. There we go. He started writing plays around 1590. Wrote approximately 39 plays by 1614 and then died in 1616. Why do I say approximately 39 plays? Because there's still a few of those, 3 or 4, that not everybody agrees if Shakespeare for sure wrote part of them or most of them or whatever. So there's some dispute over, but around 39. And about half of his plays were first published in 1623. So after he died is when a lot of his plays were first available for people to read. So the plays most often read for middle school and high school are these 5: Hamlet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, Twelfth Night. There are a few others that are sometimes common too, but those are the 5 most common. And here I wanted to have a little bit of audience participation. So I've got a poll that I wanted to just have you briefly respond with any plays that you have seen in a theater or on film, or that you've read. And there are options toward the bottom. You might have to scroll down where it says other or none. So if you could go ahead and respond to that. It should let you select multiple choices, I think, to where you can select multiple plays, but I can't promise that. So it looks like we're getting some votes in. So for a lot of people, it's Hamlet, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Romeo and Juliet, especially Romeo and Juliet. And that makes sense. We're going to watch a clip from Romeo and Juliet in a moment, but it's very often used for middle school and high school students because it's about young teenagers falling in love. So it seems to sort of make sense to have that be what is available for to get people into Shakespeare. So some helpful ways to think about the plays. These are scripts written to be performed. So seeing, hearing, or even performing them can be a really good way to actively engage with what you're reading instead of sort of just reading it. You want to try to imaginatively engage with the text in some way so that you can sort of get into it and enjoy it more, that it's not just, trying to sort of read a script as though it was a short story or a novel or something like that. So here I've got another little audience participation activity. I want to have us read a speech, and then I want everybody to practice delivering it. So we'll talk about what that will entail. So I have here a short speech from A Midsummer Night's Dream. Up here you see where it says Robin. That is the speech prefix or speech heading, which identifies who is speaking, which character. So this is Robin Goodfellow, otherwise known as Puck, who's this significant character in A Midsummer Night's Dream. He's a fairy, and he's a very mischievous fairy. He likes to play pranks and sort of cause trouble and things. And that's a lot of what happens in the play itself. So this is when Puck has just shown up on stage. I think this is his second speech. Another fairy has approached him and basically said, "Are you not Robin Goodfellow, Puck, known for, these various kinds of mischief?" So this is his response. And I've already had a volunteer kind enough to practice reading this. So we're going to listen to just kind of a regular read through here.
Thou speakest aright, I am that merry wander of the night. I jest to Oberon, and make him smile, when I a fat and bean-fed horse beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal, and sometime lurk I in a gossip's bowl, in very likeness of a roasted crab, and when she drinks against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale, the wisest ant telling the saddest tale. Sometime for a 3-foot stool mistaketh me, then slip I from her bun, down topples she in tailor, cries and falls into a cough, and then the whole choir hold their hips and laugh, and waxen in their mirth and knees, and swear a merrier hour was never wasted there. But room fairy, here comes Oberon.
All right, so that last line, he's talking about these pranks, and then his last line, he's responding to this fairy saying, "But room, give us room, step back. Here comes Oberon, who's the king of the fairies." So that last line is kind of transitioning to Oberon entering. So I've gone through and highlighted a few of the words that might be particularly sort of troublesome or unusual. That whole first line, "Thou speakest aright," sounds kind of weird to modern ears. So the way to make that clearer is to change the thou into you and just make it "you speak right." You speak right. I am that merry wanderer of the night. And then beguile just means to sort of deceive. So he's talking about when I, a fat and bean-fed horse, beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal. So he'll take the shape or appearance of another horse and fake out a fat and bean-fed horse. And apparently the fairies think this is very funny. Sometimes lurk I in a gossip's bowl, so a woman's bowl as she's eating, in the very likeness of a roasted crab. So he turns himself into this piece of crab meat in a stew or something like that. And when she drinks, against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale. So right as she's going to take a bite, he starts moving around, totally freaks her out, and she dumps all of this soup, ale onto her lap. Right. And then the next line starts a third prank here. It's another woman. The wisest ant telling the saddest tale, sometime for 3-foot stool mistaketh me. So mistaketh is just a sort of old-fashioned sounding way of saying mistake. But also that line can be a little bit tricky because it's not grammatically the same as we would normally say it now. It would normally be something like, sometimes she mistakes me for a 3-foot stool, right? And so we would rearrange those words a little bit. So the grammar here is a little bit tricky, but that's not because it's really old, even though this is over 400 years ago. It's because it's poetry. And so the poet, in this case Shakespeare, has rearranged some of the words and phrasing to make it fit into the meter and sound the way he wants it to. And in this case, to have end rhymes. These are all rhyming couplets. So mistaketh me, and then me rhymes with she. So by rearranging the line, he's able to keep the sort of rhythm of the verse of the poetry, and also give those rhyming couplets that make up most of the speech until the very last line. Slip I from her bum, down topples she, and Taylor cries and falls into a cough. And Taylor cries. Okay, so he slips from her bottom and she falls and she cries Taylor. Why would somebody cry Taylor when they fall? She probably ripped her pants, right? She's torn a seam when she fell on the ground, and so she's crying out for a tailor who would have to come repair her clothing, right? And so she cries this out. She falls into a cough. The whole choir hold their hips and laugh. So the whole choir, this whole group of people around, maybe they're in a restaurant or something. This group of people around who all see this woman fall on her bottom, and cry out for a tailor. And they hold their hips and laugh. Laugh is a strange word. Most Shakespeare plays and modern editions have modernized spelling so that they're just easier to read for modern readers. So some of these words were originally spelled differently, and they've gone through and modernized all the spelling. They've kept the speakest and mistaketh part in there, but some of the other words were spelled differently, and they made it more easily readable to a modern audience. But laugh is different, right? It's just laugh. But I think that they've kept the spelling for it in this case so that we could pronounce it in the way that would make it rhyme with cough, that would keep those rhyming couplets. And Taylor cries and falls into a cough, and when the whole choir hold their hips and laugh, and waxen in their mirth and knees and swear. So they, sort of explode with mirth and making noises. A merrier hour was never wasted there. Okay, so this speech, I mean, there's a lot going on here. He's got these 3 different pranks he's talking about. But there's not a whole lot of terminology or words that are all that difficult or unusual, right? This is over 400 years old. And beguile might be a word that some people, may not be familiar with, but that's still a modern word that gets used. If we change speakest to speak and mistaketh to mistake, there's not really anything in here that makes it terribly difficult in terms of being old. Oh. All right, so now I want to go ahead and have us try to practice delivering this. Okay, so we've gone through and read it, and we've gone back through and sort of figured it out, like, what's he talking about here? What's he saying? So now we want to think about, well, what kind of tone, how do we want to emphasize these lines? So he's sort of bragging and laughing about some of these pranks he's pulled. So I'm going to go ahead and try this. I want you to, wherever you're at, to also, if you're willing and able, looking at the camera, looking at the screen, to try to really deliver this, speaking it out loud instead of just reading it. Thou speakest aright. I am the merry wanderer of the night. I jest to Oberon and make him smile, when I a fat and bean-fed horse beguile, neighing in likeness of a filly foal. And sometime lurk I in a gossip's bowl, in very likeness of a roasted crab. And when she drinks, against her lips I bob, and on her withered dewlap pour the ale. The wisest ant, telling the saddest tale, sometime for 3-foot stool mistaketh me. Then slip I from her bum, down topple she, and Taylor cries and falls into a cough. And then the whole choir hold their hips and laugh, and waxen in their mirth and knees and swear, a merrier hour was never wasted there. All right. So you can see how you can sort of try to liven it up, because all of these lines were written to be performed and delivered, and not just sort of read, right? So seeing and hearing Shakespeare's plays in performance can make it easier to understand the text because actors have often um, already made what I would call readerly choices. So they've already gone through and marked up the text and made notes and thought about what kind of emotion they want to try to come across with these particular lines. What action will they be doing on stage while they're delivering these lines? So they've made these choices for you as they were readers. And so when you're watching it, it can help things come across more clearly because there's less sort of interpretive possibilities. At the same time, one of the real sort of joys about reading this is the interpretive possibilities and thinking about, okay, how could this be performed? How could this be played? How could this be delivered? All right, so speaking of Shakespeare and performance, I have here a short clip from Romeo and Juliet. This is from Act 2, Scene 2. This is after Romeo and Juliet. These two young teenagers have just met at a party immediately before this scene, and they've instantly fallen in love with each other. It was love at first sight. So they're young teenagers, and that's where we pick up.
That tongue's uttering, yet I know.
Hold on, I gotta backtrack here.
Soft, while light through yonder window breaks. It is the east, and Juliet is the sun. Arise, fair sun, and kill the envious moon, who is already sick and pale with grief that thou, her maid, art far more fair than she. Be not her maid, since she is envious. Her vestal livery is but sick and green, and none but fools do wear it. Cast it off. Hey, it is my lady. Ooh. It is my love. Oh, that she knew she were. She speaks, yet she says nothing. What of that? Her eye discourses. I will answer it. I am too bold. 'Tis not to me she speaks. Two of the fairest stars in all the heaven, having some business, to entreat her eyes to twinkle in their spheres till they return. Why, if her eyes were there, they in her head? The brightness of her cheek would shame those stars. See how she leans her cheek upon her hand? That I were a glove upon that hand, that I might touch that cheek.
I me.
She speaks. Oh! Speak again, bright angel, for thou art as glorious to this night, being o'er my head, as is a winged messenger of heaven, unto the white, upturned, wondering eyes of mortals that fall back to gaze on him, when he bestrides the lazy puffing clouds.
Remember Romeo pointing to the audience around him when he was saying that. We'll talk about that later.
Art thou, Romeo? Deny thy father and refuse thy name, or if thou wilt not, be but sworn my love, and I'll no longer be a Capulet.
Oh, shall I hear more? Shall I speak of this?
'Tis but thy name is my enemy. What's Montague? It is nor hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for thy name, which is no part of thee, take all myself.
I take thee at thy word. They'll call me but love, and I'll be new baptized. Henceforth, I never will be Romeo.
What man art thou that thus be screened at night, so stumblest on my counsel?
By a name, I know not how to tell thee who I am. My name, dear saint, is hateful to myself because it is an enemy to thee, and I have written, I would tear the word.
My ears have yet not drunk 100 words of that tongue's uttering, yet I know the sound. Art thou not Romeo and a Montague?
Neither, fair maid, if I with thee dislike.
How camest thou hither? Tell me, and wherefore the orchard walls are high and hard to climb, and the place death, considering who thou art, if any of my kinsmen find thee here.
With love's light wings did I o'erperch these walls. The stony limits cannot hold love out, and what love can do, that dares love attempt. Therefore, thy kinsmen are no stop to me.
If they do see thee, they will murder thee.
Alack, there lies more peril in thine eye than 20 of their swords. Look thou but sweet, and I am proof against their enmity.
I would not for the world they saw thee here.
All right, I'll stop it there. So Romeo and Juliet, one is a Capulet and the other is a Montague, and their families are sort of feuding. They're sort of at war with each other. They hate each other. And so when Juliet appears and gives her sort of famous Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou Romeo, she's saying, why are you Romeo? Why must you be called Romeo? Why must you be called a Montague if you could only change your name and still be the same person? So the whole thing about, removing his name and adopting another so that she wouldn't have to worry about the fact that their families hate each other. All right, let me see if I can get out of this. I had some issues with this earlier, so I have to try it like this, I think.
Cloak. Me from their eyes.
Changes in her. Discover it.
Lady, by on the blessed moon, I vow that tips with silver all these fruit tree
Oh,
tops.
swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon.
All right, let me try this. Okay, that should fix it. Sorry about that. Let me share my screen again. So stage directions, which we'll look at, stage directions matter. I've had students come into my college classes before saying that when they read a play, they just ignore the stage directions. But stage directions are really important because that's what tells you when you're reading the play, the action that's supposed to be going on instead of just the words, the dialogue. So here I've got a page, this is A Midsummer Night's Dream again. And there are several stage directions on this page. So you see Demetrius and Robin or Puck shifting places. There's an exeunt over here, enter Lysander, and then he lies down. So all of those are stage directions, which is why they're in italics in this particular text. Some of them have these kind of partial brackets around them too. So those partial brackets tell us that those are not in the original text. A modern editor has added those. So exeunt, which just means exit, and he lies down, were in the original text printed during Shakespeare's lifetime over 400 years ago. And then modern editors have added in shifting place and enter Lysander based on what's going on here, because Robin or Puck is deceiving these two pairs of lovers in this forest. He's made it very foggy so they can't see anything, and he's kind of projecting and impersonating their voices to get them to go in different directions. Okay, so that's his whole shifting place, trying to get them to sort of move around and go apart from each other. All right, so something else that's sort of strange about Shakespeare is that all of the women's roles were played by boys. And lots of sort of modern readers and theater goers have heard this at some point. They're aware of it, but they may not really be aware of why. This image, by the way, is from a modern production of As You Like It, where they were using an all-male cast to try to give some sense of what this might have looked like during Shakespeare's lifetime. So why have all of the women's roles played by boys? There is actually a somewhat understandable reason. So when early modern theater, Renaissance English theater, was trying to get established, when professional players, actors, were first trying to be able to make a living just by acting and not have to have another job, they had a lot of pushback. Traditionally, in English culture, plays had been performed by guilds, often for festivals and holidays and things as sort of public entertainments. But those were always amateur productions. Nobody was making money off of those. So professional theater involved people actually trying to make money, make a living off of being actors and performing in plays. And there were a lot of people in London who didn't like the sound of that, who weren't crazy about plays, who thought that they were potentially corrupting to the children, that it was the sort of thing that there shouldn't be any of. And so the playing companies, the actors, and the playwrights themselves many of them had been in guilds, actual guilds. And so they basically followed that guild model when they figured out how they wanted to put together an acting company. And so what that meant was that they had apprentices, and they would actually be their apprentice in the guild many of them still belong to. So down here near the bottom, John Hemming was a really important actor in Shakespeare's company, the Lord Chamberlain's Men, and he was a grocer. And so he would take apprentices, one or two boys at a time, as his apprentice grocers. And technically they were apprentice grocers, but actually they were apprentice actors, because he was a professional actor. He just still belonged to the Grocers Guild. So he would take these apprentices on and they would become apprentice actors, and they would play all the women's roles, because these professional acting companies thought that they would be able to sort of get around the obstacles that people who were really trying to stop theater were putting in place. They could get around those obstacles if they really followed a guild model closely, even though they didn't have an official guild of their own. And so they took on apprentices. They were boys. Generally in early modern London, guilds didn't allow women in. And so that's how professional theater developed into having young teenage boys playing all of the women's roles. So it'd usually be around like the age of 12 to 15 or 16 would play all the women's roles. Okay, so now I want to shift a little bit to another play, Hamlet. And one of the most, actually probably the most famous, influential speech ever written in a play in English, which is To Be or Not to Be. So it's this long, in-depth speech where he's thinking about all of these like major things, life and death. And it's often performed now in ways that really emphasize the idea that we're almost inside of Hamlet's head, that we're sort of hearing his thoughts, we're reading his mind when he is delivering this speech. So I've got some clips here to show how even in films that's been done to sort of give us the sense of being inside of Hamlet's head here.
So we'll start with Laurence Olivier's 1948 Hamlet. The camera
really interestingly sort of goes through his head here, and we'll even get a brief image of a brain to really help signify that we're sort of inside his head right now.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To sleep perchance to dream, aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must leave us pause.
Ben Crystal is a professional actor who works on original pronunciation, so this will give us an idea of what the speech sounded like in Shakespeare's time.
To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, to slay, no more. And by a slave, say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is aching. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die, to slay perchance to dream, aye, that's the road. For in that slave of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time? The oppressor's wrong, the poor man's contumely, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin. Who would these fowls bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life? But that the threat of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience doth make cords of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought and enterprises of great pith and moment with this regard. Let currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
So it sounds quite different than people with modern accents performing it tend to sound. Aside from the difference in pronunciation, though, the difference in the sound of it, all of these productions, they give us this sense of a close-up just on Hamlet, or even like going through his mind, going through his brain, that he is, thinking out loud, basically, that we can sort of hear his thoughts somehow. And so often this kind of speech is called a soliloquy, and that's a certain kind of monologue. So one person delivering a speech, with the idea being that they're sort of thinking out loud, that they're just delivering a speech to nobody in particular. They're just saying things out loud. There's nobody else on stage with them. But a monologue like that worked differently in Shakespeare's time than it does now. So I've got here a diagram of Shakespeare's globe, a sort of reconstruction of it, what it could look like. And so you see on the stage, there's all of this space on three sides of the stage where people could actually stand right up next to the stage on three sides of it. And then up here, in this kind of gallery section at the back of the stage, would also be seats. That's where the Lord's boxes were. So those were probably the most expensive seats in the house. So an actor on stage would have people in the audience on all four sides. And he'd be performing in broad daylight because this is an outdoor theater. So as he's delivering a speech, he's going to be looking people in the eye the whole time. He's never going to be just sort of, looking down like he's looking inside himself or something like that. He's always going to be delivering a speech to a person. If it's not a person on stage, it's going to be people in the audience. And that's why that clip from Romeo and Juliet's kind of cool, because that was done in a theater that had a thrust stage with audience on three sides. And so you could see the actor, really sort of pointing to and involving the audience all around him. This is an actual photo from what's called Shakespeare's Globe, a reconstructed globe in London, to also give you an idea of what that could look like sort of in reality. So the actors that are up here, and then there's audience, people sitting in the audience in this above space also. It also means that they couldn't use any backgrounds, any scenery, because anything, flat that would be against this wall, a lot of people in the audience couldn't see it. It would just be the people in front of the stage. So they had very elaborate props and costumes, but no scenery. All right, so other early versions of Hamlet, something else that's strange and interesting about Shakespeare, about Hamlet, and many of his other plays, is that they actually existed in different versions in the period. Now, I mentioned before that about half of his plays were first printed after his death, but those early printings, some of them were printed during his lifetime, and they differ from each other in weird and interesting ways. So this is just a very short page from the very first version of Hamlet. In 1603, this was printed. It's a modern edition of it. It didn't look exactly like this. But you see that Enter Hamlet is the original stage direction, and then Carambus and King Hyde is not original. An editor has added that in. One of the reasons I wanted to use this page is because in this version of the play, which is about half the length of what modern people would recognize as Hamlet, this version of the play has very different speeches. There's a lot of stuff missing because it is half the length. And the most important speech, the most influential speech in English drama, this to be or not to be speech, is very different in this version, and it's at a different spot in the play. So in the sort of regular Hamlet that people are accustomed to, Hamlet comes on stage and he starts delivering the speech, and he's not actually alone on stage anyways. Ophelia, his sort of love interest, is supposed to be around, and there's at least a couple of people who may be actually like hiding, trying to sort of listen in on things. So he's not actually alone on stage anyways, though those film versions certainly didn't look that way. But this earlier version has part of what goes into a different speech in the regular version. So this is just a couple scenes earlier from when To Be or Not to Be is usually delivered. But the lead up to it, you see where it says, see where he comes pouring upon a book. enter Hamlet. So a modern editor could add the stage direction, enter Hamlet with a book or poring over a book or something like that. It's pretty clear from the line, the dialogue there, that Hamlet has a book with him and is actually sort of like reading it while he walks. He's poring over it, right? So that happens. Then it goes into a different speech in the regular Hamlet. But in this version, he comes in, he's poring over this book. They hide to sort of listen in, and he starts delivering To Be or Not to Be. And one of the things that's really interesting to think about this and stage directions and sort of imaginatively engaging with your own ideas of how it could be performed is that he could, if in our version of Hamlet, he comes poring over a book and then delivers this speech, he could actually be reading the speech out of the book. Or he could be reading parts of the speech out of the book and then just sort of, delivering his own ideas and responses to the parts that he's reading out of the book. So this really sort of significant historical speech that's often thought of as being very, like psychological in his head, struggling with these issues of life and death. It could actually be him just reading it out of a book. And so that gives it a very different kind of tone and flavor if we play it that way. So modern editors shape the text of the play in many, many important ways. Depending on what version of a play you're reading, you could end up actually reading a different version than other people, either in your class, if they're reading other versions, and certainly it could be very different than a version your parents might have read at some point, because the modern editions can vary so much for some of these plays. All right, so my last section here, I just want to talk a little bit about Shakespeare's language and reading Shakespeare's plays, because sometimes that can seem difficult, challenging. It can be a little bit intimidating for readers now to try to read Shakespeare. A lot of people think of it as being very difficult. So one way to try to make it easier is to, come up with your own simplified translations of things that sound very old-fashioned. Thee or thou, you just change to you. Dost or doth becomes do or does. Thy or thine becomes your or yours. Hath is has, and so on, right? Speakest becomes speaks. So you can see how with some minor tweaks, you can sort of come up with your own modernized version of what you're reading and make it much easier for you to read, even as you're doing this in your head. So the language is difficult, but that difficulty has more to do with it being poetry than really with it being old. And that's why I had us look at that speech from Puck earlier, where none of the terminology is sort of outdated. It's just the images, the metaphors, and the jokes, and the fact that it's all poetry, it's in verse, and so some of the grammar is quite different. That's what makes it sort of difficult. All right, I have here a speech. This is also from Hamlet. This is the very first speech from Claudius, who is the king of Denmark, in Hamlet as the play begins. So this is Act 1, Scene 2. It's very beginning of the play, the very first scene with Claudius in it. He comes on stage, he starts delivering this speech. It's an important speech. One of the reasons I have this, and I want to have us look at it, is because there are a lot of sort of modern, what they call translations of Shakespeare, where one of the most popular ones is No Fear Shakespeare. And so somebody has gone through and already did a modern, what they call translation of it. But those are really bad. they're not good. They're not written well. They will lead you astray. There's all kinds of problems with them for all kinds of reasons. And so I want to talk a little bit about why. So Claudius delivers this speech. Though yet of Hamlet, our dear brother's death, the memory of green, the memory be green, it's recent. His brother just died. And that is us befitted to bear our hearts in grief, and our whole kingdom to be contracted in one brow of woe. Yet so far hath discretion fought with nature, that we with wisest sorrow think on him, together with remembrance of ourselves. Therefore, our sometime sister, now our queen, the imperial jointress of this warlike state. We'll pause there. So Claudius, the current king, his brother was king. His brother died. And Claudius has married his brother's widow. So his brother died. He married the queen, so she's still queen. Claudius, the brother, is now king. But the old king, who was also called Hamlet, has a son called Hamlet. And so, you know, Hamlet's the main character of the play. The play is about Hamlet, this son. And so this is his uncle, who is now his stepfather, who's the king of Denmark, delivering this speech. So when he says, so he's talking about the fact that his brother died very recently, and, you know, he's trying to shift gears because he's just gotten married. He's just become king. You know, he wants to start like moving forward with stuff. When he calls the queen the imperial jointress to this warlike state, I think that's a really significant line, because it talks about the queen, Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, as being a really significant part of why Claudius even is king, you know, because as the brother to the king, he didn't necessarily have a claim to the throne, but by marrying the queen, that helps secure his claim to the throne. So she has joined this warlike state. She has helped him secure power as the king. Have we, as 'twere with a defeated joy, with an auspicious and a dropping eye, with mirth and funeral, and with dirge and marriage. So funeral and marriage, sad and happy all together. In equal scale weighing delight and dole, taken to wife. Nor have we herein barred your better wisdom, which have freely gone with this affair along. For all our thanks now follows that you know, young Fortinbras, holding a weak supposal of our worth, or thinking by our late dear brother's death our state to be disjoint and out of frame, colleagued with the dream of his advantage, he hath not failed to pester us with message importing the surrender of those lands lost by his father with all bonds of law. There's some political stuff going on there where another, you know, sort of foreign power that Hamlet Sr. won some land from, they're trying to get that land back now that Hamlet has died. All right, so that's the speech. This is the No Fear Shakespeare version. Although I still have fresh memories of my brother, the elder Hamlet's death, and though it was proper to mourn him throughout our kingdom, life still goes on. I think it's wise to mourn him while also thinking about my own well-being. And he doesn't actually say my own, he's using the royal we. And so it's very important that he doesn't just say my well-being. That sounds much more selfish than it does when it's all we and us. Therefore, I've married my former sister-in-law, the queen, with mixed feelings of happiness and sadness. I know that in marrying Gertrude, I'm only doing what all of you have wisely advised all along. There's nothing about the imperial jointress there. Right? There's no indication that Gertrude is a really important part of Claudius even becoming king. And very shortly after this speech, Hamlet enters and we are introduced to him. And he ends up saying some really mean, nasty things to his mother. And they're really sort of recognizably mean and nasty. At one point, he says, "Frailty, thy name is woman." So it comes across as very sort of hateful toward women. But if Gertrude, his mother, is responsible for disinheriting him, if he was the one who was supposed to become king when his father died, but instead his uncle, marrying his mother, became king and took the throne from him, then it may make a lot more sense, or at least a different kind of sense, that he would be so angry with his mother. He's upset because his father died only a few months earlier, but he's also really upset that his mother remarried, because it's taken the throne, it's taken the crown from him that was supposed to be his. But that whole sense of him having a claim to the throne that he's lost because Claudius has married his mother, you completely lose that in this sort of modern translation. Okay. So a last bit about No Fear Shakespeare. So more reasons why you want to try to read the original, even if it's difficult. This is based on a study from a few years back. This is an article from January 2013. The works of Shakespeare and Wordsworth, rocket boosters to the brain, and better therapy than self-help books, readers say this week. So I just took a few of the really interesting bits from this article. Using scanners, the people who did this research, they monitored brain activity of a bunch of people while they were reading Shakespeare and some other poets, old poets. They then translated the text into more straightforward modern language, just like No Fear Shakespeare does, and again monitored the reader's brains as they read the words. The scan showed that the more challenging prose and poetry set off far more electrical activity in the brain than the more pedestrian versions, the more common everyday versions. Scientists were able to study the brain activity as it responded to each word and record how it lit up as the readers encountered unusual words, surprising phrases, difficult sentence structures. Remember that difficult grammar because it's poetry. The research also found that reading poetry in particular increases activity in the right hemisphere of the brain, an area concerned with autobiographical memory, helping the reader to reflect on and reappraise their own experiences in light of what they have read. So it's all kinds of good for you to read poetry, old poetry, even if it's difficult, because it gets your brain working so much more than reading sort of a modern version of it. All right, so I want to wrap this up and have a little bit of time for any questions anyone might have. Tragedies and comedies were the two most common types of plays in Shakespeare's day. Tragedies almost always end in death. Comedies almost always end in marriage. So I wanted to tell you one other little tidbit about strange, cool Shakespeare. This is Theseus toward the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And one of these two pairs of lovers, Theseus is about to get married. And there are these two pairs of lovers who, in this speech, we find out are also about to get married. But one of the fathers of one of the women wasn't happy. And so Theseus is overriding the father and saying, let these kids marry and be together. That's the way it should be. So this is a short speech from Theseus. Fair lovers, you are fortunately met. Of this discourse we more will hear anon. So he's saying, I want to hear more of your story a little later. Aegeus, I will overbear your will, for in the temple by and by with us, these couples shall eternally be knit. So these four young people, we're not sure exactly how old they are, probably late teens, early 20s, something like that. They're actually, we find out right now, are about to be married. That Theseus, the duke, the king, the person in charge, it's his wedding day, and he's saying that these other two pairs will also get married with him, right? These couples shall eternally be knit. And for the morning now is sometime worn, our proposed hunting shall be set aside. Away with us to Athens. 3 and 3 will hold a feast in great solemnity, just great celebration. 3 and 3, so 3 men, 3 women, 3 couples. So it's been morning. They were going out hunting. They found these 2 couples in the woods. There had been fairy stuff going on in the middle of the night. And now the morning is coming to an end. So he says, we'll stop hunting. We're about to go get married. We're going to go have 3 weddings, right? But when they return, they're already married. And so I threw up here why. Why don't they get married on stage? In Shakespeare's plays and other plays from the period, Shakespeare wasn't the only playwright, nobody ever gets married on stage. Some people come kind of close. They might do a mock wedding. Lots and lots of plays have weddings, but they never happen on stage. Why? This is strange and interesting. In Shakespeare's time, legally, people could be legally considered married if 2 people said the vows to each other in front of a witness. So 2 individuals say vows back and forth. If there's another person watching, they're married. You can imagine why actors putting on a play don't want to run the risk of anybody trying to claim that they've actually gotten married, that the adult professional actor has gotten married to the teenage apprentice boy playing the woman's role. So they never have weddings on stage. There's lots of weddings, but they're always off stage between scenes, something like that. All right, now time for questions. Let me open up the chat, and I'm going to make it so that people can unmute themselves too, if you like. Any questions? You should be able to unmute yourself.
Kate wants to know if this is a thing that happens more than once. That's what she said.
Yeah.
If what happens more than once?
This class.
Oh, the talk itself?
Yeah.
What I'll probably do, I've got a recording of this, so I'll probably put it up on a web page, so it'll be sort of publicly available. So I don't know that I would do this exactly again, but I'll certainly make this available. And I'm always happy to try to help out if any of your teachers or anybody are doing Shakespeare and would like to have a Shakespeare professor pitch in a little bit. I'm happy to do that.
We're all homeschooled. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. That's okay. Have you all done any Shakespeare yet?
She's in a huge Shakespeare. Well, not huge. It's like she's in it a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I've been in Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet and A Midsummer Night's Dream, Two Gentlemen of Verona. So I've been in a few.
Nice, very nice. Yeah, Two Gentlemen of Verona is one that doesn't get performed very often, so yeah. That's great.
I was the narrator.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, so I mean, I'm always happy to try to chat with people and be available for stuff. I don't have anything like this planned in the immediate future, but I'd sure be interested in doing that if enough people are interested in showing up for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Since I am homeschooled, I get to choose stuff to like write papers on just for like extra credit and stuff. And one of the things that I've been like, I have a list of like, I need to write of like things that I want to write paper on. And one of them is just Shakespeare, like in general, like the different plays, the diversity between them and stuff like that. And I was trying to decide like, what is like one of the more uncommon Shakespeare plays that like,
I mean, there's actually a lot. Can I ask, how old are you all? I'm just curious.
We're like all the same age, right? So she's almost 15 and then we're 14.
Okay, 14, 15. Because there, I mean,
they were.
some of Shakespeare's less known plays, like Titus Andronicus, is an early tragedy, and it's brutal. Like it's a rated R play. so I wouldn't recommend that. But there are a lot of sort of uncommon ones. You know, I mentioned 6 or 7 that are actually quite common.
Yeah, I wrote those down.
Yeah, but there are lots of less common ones. I mean, even Othello, a lot of people, you know, read, and it gets performed a lot, even though it wasn't on my
question.
No, you.
Another tragedy called King Lear. Do you think you'd be more interested in comedy?
What do I say?
I don't really know. I think I do so much stuff that's more comedy. I probably prefer to do something tragedy just to have a little bit more variety.
Just to do something different. Yeah. Oh, let me think. I mean, the big tragedies, the well-known ones are Hamlet, Macbeth, Othello, and King Lear. King Lear gets performed a lot, but it doesn't get read very often in middle school or high school, because King Lear himself is an 80-some-year-old king. Now, it's about him, but it's also about his 3 daughters. But the fact that there's this sort of generational thing, and that the king is 80-some years old, it tends to be less popular for American middle schools and high schools. But it's a great play. It's a great play, and it's very, sort of readable. I'm trying to think any other tragedies that might come to mind. I mean, I think for comedies, As You Like It is a good one. I think Twelfth Night was on my short list that gets read and performed a lot. As You Like It does too, but not as much, not as often.
Okay.
And it's also quite good.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Was there somebody else? I thought there was another video coming in. Someone else might have had a question or comment.
Where were all the performance? Was it in London or different parts of the country?
Well, I mean, Shakespeare was performing, living and performing in London, even though he had a house in Stratford upon Avon where he'd grown up, and where his wife was still living for years, while he was living and working in London. But they would perform at, sort of the public outdoor theaters, like Shakespeare's Globe, the one I showed the diagram and picture of the reconstructed globe. They would perform at indoor theaters that similarly had audience on 3 sides, not necessarily 4, but they were smaller. They relied on candlelight, so it wasn't just broad daylight. It cost a lot more to go, since there was a lot fewer people who could fit in there. And then they would also perform at court, at the royal court or noble court. So when people talk about court with royalty or nobility in the period, we're talking about like the group of dukes, duchesses, knights, any sort of aristocratic person who is invited to be part of this group that hangs out together is sort of the court. So the royal court, Queen Elizabeth would have festivities for holidays and things, and the Master of the Revels, which is a great title, but one of her sort of servants would organize entertainments for several days for a holiday. And so that would include having professional actors come and put on plays just for like the queen and some aristocrats, or after she died in 1603, the King James and his court, his aristocrats that followed along with them. So indoor theaters, outdoor theaters, and at court. They may have done some traveling too if plague broke out in London, but we don't have any for sure records of Shakespeare's company doing that.
Now, the next question I'm going to ask you is, as you know, back in that era, there was it was very poor. It was either rich and the poor, no middle class as we know today. So when these plays were being performed, what was it mainly for the rich go there, or was the general public there too?
There's a little bit of debate about this still, because some scholars still think that it would have been difficult for like working people to go see a play that's in the middle of the afternoon. Because remember, this is done in broad daylight, right?
Right.
We know there's good evidence that there was a variety of people there. And for an outdoor theater like the Globe, to be a groundling, to be one of the people standing like right around, maybe right up to the stage, would cost a penny.
Wow.
Which in those days, that would be about the same amount as like a couple pints of beer, or you know, or a meal or something. I mean, it's not much, and you could go to a play and potentially, records suggest that you could go and maybe spend like 6 hours there, because there might be juggling and comedy acts and things going on before and after the play itself, which would be, 2 or 3 hours. So you could really go and like blow a whole afternoon if you wanted to. So we know that like apprentices and different, sort of day laborers and workers did go to plays. We know there were some of them there. But it's hard to say sort of how many or how much of the audience was sort of commoners or even like really working poor, as we might think of them now.
Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions from anybody? Casey, Daisy, Kate, did you think of anything else? It's okay if you didn't. Okay. I just thought I'd ask. I really appreciate you being here. I sort of designed this for middle and high school students and was hoping I would get some people here your age. So I'm glad you were able to join us. So, all right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Yeah.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.